Hi, I'm Melanie Ann Phillips, co-creator of the Dramatica theory and software, and welcome to another episode of Dramatica Unplugged, the ongoing program that each week looks into the secrets of story structure and storytelling to help you create better stories with or without the Dramatica software. Today's episode is Story Encoding. Story encoding is one of the 4 stages of storytelling. To understand what the stages of storytelling are and how they relate to structure, let's look at the difference between story structure and storytelling. Story structure versus storytelling. Now, in one of our earlier classes, we used an example of an original movie, Cyrano de Bergerac, starring Jose Ferrer, and compared it to Roxanne, which is starring Steve Martin, and they're pretty much the same underlying dramatic structure. It's about a guy with a long nose who writes letters and pretends to be somebody else to help somebody win a girl's love, and then the problems that ensue because of the mistaken identity. Now, the structure is pretty much the same, but the storytelling is quite different, just like with West Side Story versus Romeo and Juliet, for example. The underlying dramatic fabric is pretty much the same, but the specific events, dialogue, and settings and costumes that occur in one story are quite different than the other. The structure refers to the underlying dramatic relationships, and the storytelling to the means or manner of expression. Now, there was one thing in Cyrano versus Roxanne that we noticed. In Cyrano de Bergerac, it is Cyrano himself who says, "How about if I write these letters for you?" And therefore, it has kind of some sad things happening at the end, whereas in Roxanne, it is the friend of the Cyrano character, the friend of Steve Martin, who says, "Will you write these letters for me?" So it's a different person who causes the problem going in the first place. And as a result of that, there's a different kind of structure that has to take place when regarding who started the problem, a different kind of conclusion that's necessary. Some things must change to accommodate a different person being responsible for the problem, even though most of what happens is the same. So the parts that are identical are the structural parts, with the exception of where the structure has been specifically altered. The storytelling is just the manner of expression, regardless of whether the structure is the same or not. So, in structure, we can then strip away all of the interesting emotional aspects of the story that make the audience become involved with it, and instead just look at the mechanism, the clockwork that is beneath it, the substructure. And we can see there are 4 primary areas of substructure: characters, theme, plot, genre, plot, and genre. Now, each of these actually touches on the others. Character has some thematic aspects to it. Characters do things in the plot. Characters participate in the genre. Theme, although there's a thematic topic and a thematic argument, theme also looks at the characters in terms of value standards and compares them, the message, the moral. It looks at plot to identify the methods used in the plot as being proper or improper, better or worse than another. And it contributes overall to the genre, saying that these are the issues that come up when dealing with the overall settings, situations, and means of expression used in a particular genre. So you can look at each one of these as being made up of the other 3, in a sense, or being able to impact the other 3 as well as having its own central area. But for any given story point, it's going to fall primarily into one of these. You're going to see that it centers as an aspect of character, an aspect of theme, an aspect of plot, or an aspect of genre. So these are the 4 aspects of story structure. That's what we call them in Dramatica. But when it comes time to tell a story, that's a process, not a collection of parts. And the process of storytelling has 4 stages: story forming, story encoding, which is what tonight's class is about, story weaving, excuse me, and story reception. And I'm going to take story reception. Okay, I'm going to take a moment to describe each of these 4 stages of storytelling. Story forming, and actually let me zoom in a little bit before I go any farther, because I don't need to be that far out. I'm far out enough as it is already. There we go. Story forming refers to the creating of the underlying dramatic structure using the elements of structure, those 4 aspects: character, plot, theme, and genre. When you are putting them together in particular arrangements, juxtapositions, combinations, you are forming the underlying structure for your story. Encoding, stage 2, deals with turning those raw elements into the real people, places, and events that take place in your story, that populate your story. Weaving is when you work out your exposition plan, how you're going to drop the information about these elements with which you're working that represent structural elements to your audience. How are you going to unfold your story? And finally, reception is where you do your actual writing. Why is it called reception if you're the one doing the writing? Because you have to consider how things are going to be received by the audience at this stage. Your choice of words, whether you think they'll understand an allusion to some kind of in-joke, for example, whether you're writing for an ethnic group, whether you're writing for adults or children, men or women primarily, a particular religion, whether you're writing for a particular country. All of these things need to be taken into consideration. Suppose your characters are already well known and this is a sequel. Suppose it's an adaptation of something from another medium. What does the audience bring to it? That's going to affect how you write it. So this is the actual writing stage. Now, most authors don't do it in this order. Most authors start piecing things together as they begin to develop a story. They have an idea for a character, a little bit of plot, something about how they want to unfold something in an interesting way. Maybe they've got a few symbols that they want to use or particular scenarios that they don't even know dramatically what they mean yet, but they're just interesting scenarios. They have a little bit of the structure, well, they want it to come out this way or this kind of activity to be going on. And they may know something about who they want to write for. They may know a lot about these things. But even though they piece it all together a bit at a time, when it comes to actually rewriting your story and trying to figure out what went wrong, how do I fix it, or can I improve something even though it's working well, then it's a good idea to be able to analyze and say, is this something wrong with the underlying structure that has a flaw, or just what I used to illustrate that structure, or the way I let the audience know about that information, conceptually my battle plan for unfolding the exposition, or the particular words that I chose to get it across. Maybe I just didn't say it well. If you can analyze and define where the problems lie, they're much easier to fix if you understand the differences among these. And similarly, for authors who like to go ahead and write a draft first before working on any of the structural elements so that their muse is unfettered, when they're finished, they can then use this same approach here to divide it into these stages and look at the different areas of the communication process between author and audience and say, this is an area that needs some work, and figure out what needs to be done. All right, so character will go through forming, encoding, weaving, and reception. Plot will go through forming, encoding, weaving, and reception. And even though character will go through all of them, you could then look at forming and say, you must form your characters. You must form your plot, your genre, and your theme. You must encode your character's plot, genre, and theme. Clearly, they all cross-impact one another. Character impacts theme, impacts genre. Forming impacts encoding, impacts weaving. Character, genre, plot, theme, they all impact forming. Forming, encoding, weaving, reception, they'll all impact character, and so on. They're all tied in together, even though they're different elements. Tonight, then, we're going to be talking about this stage. We've already done in the class in sequence so far character and theme. We've also done forming, and now we're doing encoding. So rather than looking at how to create a structure, we're saying, suppose you have a structure. How do you then turn it into the real people, places, and things, events that take place in your story? Or, if you've written a story without an eye towards structure, how can you boil it down into the basic encodings so that you know what these pieces are, and from them find out what the structure is underneath, to determine what the structure is of a story you've already told, to take the symbols and get out the essence and say, now we see what structural pieces are missing or have taken a wrong step. So both for the writer who wants to start with the structure and work up, the structuralist writer, or for the inspirationist writer who wants to write first and then work down, Story Encoding will have something for you tonight.